In this world, some individuals, as cautioned by Søren Kierkegaard, require careful consideration in our associations. These people might inflict serious harm and burden on your life. In today's video, we will explore 15 types of individuals whom Kierkegaard warns us to be cautious of. If you notice someone in your life exhibiting these behaviors, it's advisable to distance yourself from them. Before we delve into the discussion, thank you all for watching. Please give us a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more Kierkegaardian insights to enhance your life. Firstly, the flatterer. The flatterer is one of the toxic figures Kierkegaard warns us to be cautious of. This is a group of individuals who use insincere praise and compliments as a means, not out of genuine admiration, but to seek some personal gain. Through excessive flattery, they attempt to cleverly win our favor while concealing ulterior motives. Kierkegaard urges us to remain vigilant against flatterers, to see through their attempts to manipulate us with false praise. While sincere praise is welcomed, an exaggerated form should raise a red flag. Flatterers might try to ingratiate themselves to gain assistance, vie for power or influence, or simply to satisfy their own vanity. Regardless of their motivations, their excessive flattery is only a means to achieve personal objectives rather than a genuine acknowledgment of our virtues. Kierkegaard's advice is not to be deceived by these tactics. We should scrutinize the motives behind flattery, being cautious not to trust their words too readily or fulfill their requests easily. Insincere praise brings us no benefit, and the wise course of action is to see through the flattery, identifying the true intentions of the flatterer. Secondly, the covetous. The covetous, as warned by Kierkegaard, represent another toxic personality one should be cautious of. Driven by endless material desires, these individuals have lost their grasp on judgment and character. For the covetous, the pursuit of wealth, material possessions, and social status becomes the primary focus of their lives. They incessantly crave more, never feeling content even when affluent. Their greed knows no bounds, resorting to any means to scheme, exploit, and trample upon others, all in the pursuit of accumulating more wealth and possessions. Life, in their perspective, is a zero-sum game. They are unwilling to share because they desire everything to belong to them. However, the desires of the covetous are insatiable. Their wealth cannot fill the emptiness within, as they perpetually sense a lack. Kierkegaard recognizes that greed stems from a mindset of inadequacy, and the covetous can never experience satisfaction. This mindset disrupts their inner peace and integrity. Kierkegaard advises us to free ourselves from the torment of greed, to find contentment in having enough, and to focus on genuinely valuable aspects such as character, wisdom, and tranquility. The values of the covetous are distorted. They pursue money and material goods rather than virtues and serenity. Kierkegaard reminds us not to emulate the covetous, nor envy their wealth, as more does not necessarily mean better. True satisfaction comes from within, not from external possessions. Thirdly, the envious. The envious, another toxic individual type cautioned by Kierkegaard, should be avoided. These individuals feel discontented with others' talents, success, or wealth, constantly complaining and harboring jealousy towards what others possess. The envious believe that others' good fortune comes at their own expense, viewing life as a zero-sum game where others gaining means they lose. This leads to the breeding of envy, insecurity, and hostility. They attempt to express these emotions by undermining those they envy. Envious individuals seek to diminish others' talents, attribute their success to luck or privilege, and spread malicious rumors. Essentially, they try to weaken those they perceive as superior. Envy also turns the envious into malicious beings who cannot stand to see others surpass them, thus attempting to disrupt such situations. In contrast to drawing inspiration from others' achievements, the envy of these individuals results in sarcastic remarks, bitter compliments, and a gloating attitude when the envied face misfortune. Kierkegaard views envy as an unconscious moral weakness stemming from a lack of wisdom, but he emphasizes that we can choose whether to be influenced by envy. The wise course of action is to regard others with goodwill and celebrate their successes, rather than getting entangled in the emotions of envy. We should seek inspiration from others' talents, nurture our virtues, and avoid falling into the trap of envy. Fourthly, the chronically angry. Kierkegaard warns us of another problematic personality type, the chronically angry. These individuals easily fall into a state of anger, frequently feeling resentful and desiring revenge. Their temper often overwhelms reason and judgment. The chronically angry are prone to exaggerated reactions to even minor provocations, whether real or imagined. They tend to view others' behavior and words in the most negative light, quickly succumbing to anger. They may hold grudges for extended periods, refusing to forgive or let go. Kierkegaard believes that the root of anger lies in thwarted desires and a sense of helplessness. The chronically angry feel they haven't received what they deserve, nurturing feelings of resentment and aggressive impulses. When anger takes hold, clear thinking and constructive action become challenging for the chronically angry. Their emotions cloud their judgment, potentially making matters worse with harsh words and impulsive actions. Kierkegaard advises us not to emulate the chronically angry. Although anger may be unconscious, we can choose how to respond. The wise course of action is to pause and think when feeling provoked. Succumbing to anger only poisons our own lives. It is better to act from a perspective of reason and self-control, rather than indulging in petty resentment and anger. As Seneca said, any person capable of angering you becomes your master. Fifthly, the chronic complainer. The chronic complainer is another draining personality type cautioned against by Kierkegaard. These individuals constantly indulge in negative emotions, criticizing and whining about their surroundings. What they spread is melancholy rather than positive energy, as they adopt a critical attitude towards almost everything, be it the weather, government, work, or relationships. In their eyes, minor flaws become significant complaints. The chronic complainer's attitude is perpetually dissatisfied, rather than taking constructive action. They simply keep complaining, always portraying themselves as victims, appearing helpless, when in reality, they can take measures to improve things. Chronic complainers seek sympathy from others and tend to widely spread their complaints to garner attention. This behavior fosters a negative atmosphere, dragging down both themselves and those around them. Kierkegaard emphasizes that chronic complainers fail to realize that their venting only reinforces their unhappiness, turning it into a toxic mindset. As Epictetus said, if you wish to be rich, do not add to your money, but subtract from your desire. Kierkegaard's lesson is not to emulate complainers. Although we may face difficulties, excessive lamentation only makes things worse. A wiser approach is to focus on making the most of what we can control, taking constructive action, rather than indulging in negative emotions. Difficulties are inevitable, but we can choose to face them with wisdom and resilience instead of getting caught up in meaningless complaints. Sixthly, the self-pitying. The self-pitying is another annoying personality type that Kierkegaard warns us not to emulate. These individuals indulge in their misfortunes, portraying themselves as victims at every turn. They don't take responsibility for their own circumstances and blame others, fate, the universe. Anything can be an excuse for their predicament. Their attitude is "poor me, I should be treated better by this unfair world." This attitude fosters a mindset of helplessness and resentment. The self-pitying expect others to indulge them and make up for their faults. They spread sorrowful stories to evoke sympathy and comfort. However, they often overlook their responsibility for their situation, falling into the victim mentality, avoiding the need to take responsibility and initiate change. They lack empathy for the difficulties others may be facing. Kierkegaard warns us not to fall into the mindset of self-pity and suggests adopting a balanced view of life's ups and downs, rather than indulging in adversity. We should focus on what we can control, cultivate resilience, and avoid portraying ourselves as victims. Challenges are inevitable, but we decide whether to face them maturely or in an overly dramatic way. As Marcus Aurelius said, tell yourself each day, today I will encounter interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. Seventhly, the arrogant. The arrogant is another toxic personality type with an excessively high self-esteem and a sense of superiority over others. Their excessive pride blinds them to their flaws and real status. Arrogant individuals always assume they are right, the best, and deserve special treatment. They are convinced of their exceptional talents, wisdom, status, and rights. This makes the arrogant display arrogance towards others, viewing advice or criticism as something beneath their level. The arrogant attitude fosters intolerance, disrespect, and hostility towards those perceived as inferior. Arrogant individuals fail to recognize their mistakes or limitations because it would undermine their grand self-image. Their pride leaves no room for humility or self-reflection, making it difficult for them to be taught. They refuse to accept useful feedback that could contribute to improvement or consideration. Establishing genuine connections is also a challenging task for them because interacting with equals cannot satisfy their need for dominance and recognition. Kierkegaard warns against the foolishness of arrogance and advises us to cultivate humility, acknowledging the inherent flaws of being human. Pride should come from living virtuously, not exaggerating our own importance. As Marcus Aurelius said, you have no control over how others judge you. Their nature and character are the determinants of their behavior. Eighthly, the selfish. The selfish prioritize their own interests above everything else, disregarding the impact of their actions on others. A mindset centered around "what's in it for me" is the guiding principle for the selfish, with their major decision-making focused on how to benefit personally. Selfish individuals pursue their own agenda, neglecting the needs of others, breaking promises, and showing indifference to responsibilities that don't immediately serve them. They sacrifice others to achieve personal gain, and their excessive self-interest blinds them to social obligations. This creates an unreliable and disloyal reputation for them. While selfish individuals may gain some short-term benefits, in the long run, they lose interpersonal relationships and respect. Kierkegaard warns us that selfishness is ultimately a hollow path. As social beings, we are destined to live harmoniously rather than seeking conflict. Elevating others is more meaningful than merely elevating oneself. As Marcus Aurelius said, what makes people good is doing the right thing, focusing on others' happiness. Ninthly, the stubborn. These individuals firmly cling to their viewpoints, refusing to listen to reason or compromise. Their inflexibility makes dealing with them challenging. Stubborn individuals insist on doing things their way, regardless of anything else. They cannot or are unwilling to consider alternative perspectives, suggestions, or possibilities, even if there is clear evidence contradicting their deeply rooted stance. This leads to resistance to change and growth, as stubborn individuals prefer to stick to their original errors rather than adjusting course and admitting mistakes. Taking a more thoughtful approach requires opening the mind, rather than stubbornly clinging to assumptions. The fixity of stubbornness makes it difficult for them to meet the needs of others in relationships and cooperation, turning everything into a power struggle rather than mutual exchange. They prefer to act in their way or no way, which often alienates people. Kierkegaard teaches us the foolishness of stubbornness. While principles are important, wise individuals possess rational and cautious flexibility in applying them. When we refuse to adapt to changing circumstances or listen to the wisdom of others, we harm ourselves. Our goal should be to pursue truth and improvement, rather than stubbornly adhering to a fragile self. 10thly, the indifferent. The indifferent lack empathy and are unconcerned about the impact of their words and actions on others. They pay no attention to social cues or understanding others' viewpoints and are insensitive to things that might cause harm, offense, or discomfort. They push forward with their agenda regardless, without considering the impact on others. This indifference fosters hurt and resentment, leaving behind a trail of emotionally wounded, angry, and diminished individuals. However, the indifferent are oblivious and indifferent to the harm they cause, showing no reflection on how to act in a more appropriate manner. Their cutting humor, blunt criticism, and callousness erode goodwill and trust. The relationships of the indifferent remain superficial because displaying vulnerability around them is unsafe. Kierkegaard advocates for cultivating more compassion, care, and concern in our behavior. While we cannot control how others perceive us, we should strive to interact in a kind and considerate manner. Callousness leads to disharmony and isolation, while thoughtfulness brings understanding and shared experiences. As Marcus Aurelius said, the person who does wrong often doesn't know that he is doing wrong. 11th, the cynic. These individuals hold contempt for sincerity, idealism, and kindness, viewing them as naive or foolish. The reflexive skepticism of cynics destroys hope and erodes the foundations of community. They assume that people's motives are always the worst and hold a disdainful attitude toward anything positive. Virtues like honesty, compassion, and altruism are seen as hypocritical and unrealistic by them. This cynical attitude stems from disappointment and becomes a way to protect their self-esteem. They refuse to see virtues as genuine to avoid feeling naive or disheartened when goodness fails. However, this skepticism turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy, distancing relationships and undermining the objects of their suspicion. The cynical, sarcastic remarks and skeptical attitude often make others feel alienated. Ridicule and the refusal to believe in the goodness corrode relationships. Beneath their protective disdain lies sadness for the good they feel deceived by. Kierkegaard teaches us that despite the existence of evil, we must maintain faith in our shared potential and have confidence in virtues and good deeds. Cynicism is corrosive, consuming our power to improve society. Despite disappointments, we must remain open to sincerity and collectively strive to increase justice and compassion in the world. As Marcus Aurelius said, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. 12thly, the manipulator. These individuals prioritize personal interests, achieving their goals through exploitation and deception, losing trust in their interpersonal relationships due to this deceit. Manipulators see interpersonal interactions as a chess game, distorting situations strategically to align with their interests. They gain influence in imaginary alliances, forcing outcomes toward their selfish goals. This calculated manipulation makes manipulators cunning but lacks trustworthy qualities. They may display surface goodwill and sincerity, but it's only a facade covering their selfish agenda. While manipulators superficially establish interpersonal connections, once they lose utility favorable to them, they will readily abandon. Their motives always supersede interpersonal relationships, and this exploitative approach to relationships ultimately backfires. Although manipulators may achieve some victories in the short term through cunning plans, their deception and betrayal of trust will eventually invite retribution. People see through the manipulator's disguise and refuse to be exploited again. Kierkegaard realizes that deception and exploitation eventually lead to isolation for manipulators. Treating others with sincerity and respect, considering them as worthy peers rather than pawns, is the only moral and wise way. Deception can never nurture genuine cooperation. 13th, the reckless. These individuals are willing to take risks without considering the consequences of their actions, putting themselves and others in unnecessary danger. Their recklessness can jeopardize not only themselves, but also those around them. Reckless individuals seek thrills and push their limits without considering potential dangers. They enjoy the excitement derived from foolish gambles, ignore warning signals, and engage in risky behaviors without precautions. However, they seem to believe that rules do not entirely apply to them, and this reckless behavior often leads to disasters. Reckless people leave behind a string of crises that could have been easily avoided through prudence and self-control. Their lack of discipline not only affects themselves, but also ripples out to all those impacted by their poor choices. However, even if their reckless actions cause harm, reckless individuals often fail to learn from their mistakes. They justify their errors, evade responsibility, and blindly indulge in their habits, failing to cultivate wisdom through reflective learning. Kierkegaard emphasizes living rationally rather than recklessly. While courage has its place, true bravery harmonizes boldness with reason to produce virtues rather than dangers. Recklessness ultimately benefits no one. We have a responsibility to ourselves and others, displaying discipline, self-control, facing consequences, and learning from mistakes. As Seneca said, there is nothing more disgraceful than carelessness. 14thly, the unprincipled. Individuals lacking honesty and moral standards, who pursue their goals through any means necessary, fall into the category of the unprincipled. They are unconstrained by concepts of right and wrong and are willing to lie, deceive, steal, betray, break promises, and harm others in their pursuit of ambition. For them, the end always justifies the means, creating a mindset of anything goes. Unprincipled individuals lack intrinsic ethics or a sense of conscience, easily deceiving those who trust them or exploiting people's vulnerabilities for personal gain. Others are merely obstacles or tools for them. This unethical approach inevitably backfires, making the unprincipled person untrustworthy and scorned. Once their fraudulent actions are exposed, they leave behind a trail of disillusionment and lives affected by their unethical behavior. Any achievements they gain are proven hollow. Kierkegaard stresses that pursuing virtues and noble goals is the only path to true success, as secular ambitions come and go, while moral integrity endures. We must be willing to sacrifice internal principles before losing all external conditions. Ultimately, the unprincipled person has no enduring value. As Marcus Aurelius said, the branch that is cut off from the rest of the tree is also cut off from life. 15thly, the malicious. Lastly, we discuss the most concerning personality type in Kierkegaard's philosophy, the malicious individuals who take pleasure in cruelty, domination, and causing harm to others. Their cruelty makes them extremely dangerous, viewing compassion as weakness and deriving satisfaction from inflicting pain on others. This extreme destructive behavior poisons the relationships and communities of the malicious. Their cruelty and exploitation of the weak create fear and mistrust, leaving behind trauma and despair. Their malice is a disease of the soul with contagious effects on everyone they come into contact with. Kierkegaard emphasizes that as social beings, our fates are intertwined, and harming others ultimately harms ourselves. We must vehemently resist those tempted by causing harm, as this harm undermines human dignity and bonds. True strength comes from elevating others through compassion and care. Malicious individuals pose a serious threat when in positions of power, and Kierkegaard urges us to reject and constrain those indulging in causing harm. A healthy society does not tolerate the existence of malice. As Marcus Aurelius said, to injure others is to injure oneself. The evildor may temporarily profit through evil, but in the process, they lose their humanity.